Hello, my darlings, and a very warm welcome back to the library, which is open. So I hope you've brought your library card, my darlings. Don't know why we haven't gone digital yet. Who can say? Hi. So yeah, it's Monday. Well, it's Monday when I'm taping this. Hopefully, it'll all be up and uploaded by then. But if not, then hello on insert name of day, wherever you are or when you're watching. So I'm cutting it a bit fine today because bit of a funny weekend, not a bad weekend, just a sort of quite full one in some respects. But I did get lots of reading done, which is fab. So yeah, a couple of parish notes, I suppose. This is slightly a different form of recording today. I've tried to try and do sort of cloud recordings and then edit who am I, the footage rather than just recording to my phone, because it's actually very old and the storage isn't great, so it lies to me a lot and says that it's full, which means that it makes it really difficult to create content. So hopefully this will work. If it comes out a bit rubbish, I will assess that and normal service will be resumed in the next episode. But just if you wondered, that's what I'm doing now, so the video quality might be slightly different. I'd have a cup of tea today, which feels like a sacrilege, because I drank it all before I started. Greedy. But I was drinking Bird and Blends, the lovely Bird and Blend, who are I've mentioned them before, but they're a sort of tea shop that do sort of loose leaf teas and also tea bags, but they're like very specific blends. And I've just had a right big teapot, right big, of Smoky Russian, which is a kind of it's like a sort of smoky kind of campfire tea, which is just lovely and just what I needed this morning because it's proper grim outside, isn't it, today? So, final parish notes. I am now thinking seriously about doing the online book club thing. So look out for another video either the end of this week or at the start of next week, in which I'll sort of lay out more details about that, potential dates, potential books, and how you can get involved, because I'd love to do that on sort of Zoom or something and then record that session and make it available for people. But I will want your input on what book we choose, or if that's even something you're up for, because I don't want to sort of force content on you, as it were. What else? Yeah, I'll probably do another video quite soon as well, because I get a lot of questions in my comments, which I love. But I was thinking of maybe doing a session called Ask a Book Sniffer. That's me. And maybe I'll do a Q&A video where I sort of answer your either book or life-related queries about me, should you be so inclined. So watch out for both of those. But this is, after those sort of false starts, this is part two, in a sort of way. Sort of picking up from last week, a revolution in romance, sorry, in which I talked about the eighth life. And I decided to make this part two because I think actually two of the other books that I was kind of reading alongside it actually speak to many of the similar themes. I know a lot of people have been talking in the comments about other books that have sort of similar outlook and or vibe or touch on similar things. And I thought, I don't know if it's psychological or if it's like, when you're reading something and then you find yourself sort of looking for those comparisons or complementary themes in other books, or if they were just there to begin with. But I don't suppose that matters, does it? Because it's an experience that is very personal. So for me, they kind of resonate. So yeah, I want to talk about two that I was reading alongside today, alongside the Eighth Life. And the first one is, and I put this in my most anticipated books, and it's Luck and Booth by Jenny Fagan, who is author of the Panopticon, which I believe, did it win an award? I know it was shortlisted for Granta's Best British Novelists, the Desmond Elliott Prize and the James Tate Black Prize. And it was also adapted by the National Theatre, which is lovely. So Luck and Booth is a story set over many decades of the 20th century. Yeah, we never stray into the 21st, which is probably a good thing, all things considered. And it's set in a tenement building in Edinburgh. And we sort of kick off in 1910, so the 1910s, with the daughter of the devil, who arrives in Edinburgh having her father having died, the devil, we presume, and she takes up residence in this place where she is about to become a surrogate mother for the owner of the building and his wife, with whom she forms an attachment. And then, but there's the sort of spectre of like domestic violence going on in the background. And at the same time, we're also in the 20s with a character called Flora, who is trans and is sort of making her way through life, and is attending a drag ball, which takes place at the building. And in the third, we have a young man called Levi, who is a Black American who is over in Edinburgh studying bones. And that's sort of part one. It's split into three parts. So part one is the 10s, the 20s, and the 30s. And then in part two, we go into the 40s, the 50s, the 60s. And then finally, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. And the conceit is that everything takes place in and around this building. Look at number 10, I think it's number 10, Look Booth Close. And it's a sort of story of a century with some supernatural elements that is all located around one central location, which is a really fascinating conceit. And the character of the devil's daughter, Jessie, who we meet in the 1910s, sort of lurks as a spectre. There's a moment of violence, which I don't want to ruin, which culminates in her sort of haunting the building, as it were, for the remainder of the century, up to and including the sort of end of the building, if you will, which I hope is not a spoiler. So what this book manages to do, as I say, is really kind of balance those potentially supernatural elements with very sort of real world ones. You know, we get a real sort of kaleidoscopic view of an Edinburgh and indeed a world that is in constant transit. You know, it's really quite remarkable, and in much shorter way than The Eighth Life did, to see the shifts from decade to decade, not only politically and geographically, but also socially, and in terms of, you know, how we think about and conceptualize life, love, relationships, you know, basic human understanding, I guess, the way that things are constantly in a state of evolution. So in the 40s, for instance, we encounter, sorry, I just need to check so I'm not giving you the incorrect information here, because that'd be right awful, wouldn't it? So in the 40s, we have the character of nope, that's not the 40s, is it? Ivy Proudfoot, who is interested, shall we say, in becoming a spy. I don't want to spoil too much. And then in the 50s, we have Agnes Campbell, who's a medium. And there's some connection there with the sort of origins of the building. And then in the 60s, we have William Burroughs, the poet, and who's the sort of only character that's really a sort of real person, although I think the circumstances, obviously, as described in the novel, are quite different. And then obviously in the 70s, we have Queen Bee, who is a sort of gang member who carries out a planned assassination of sorts. In the 80s, we have a man called Ivor, who is has a phobia of daylight. There's a lot of stuff about the miners there, which is really interesting contextually. And then in the 1990s, we have Dot, who is kind of, I guess she's supposed to be our closest anchor to the world as we currently understand it. You know, she's standing at the end of the century, just before the turn. It's 1999, I think, just before we tick over into the new millennium. So not just the century, but the millennium. And she's kind of our anchor between the past and the future. And she comes up against Jessie from the 1910s, so like 100 years before, as do they all in various ways. And it's about that sort of passing of the story from one generation to another, to another, to another, and how everybody sort of intrinsically becomes a part of each other's story. And again, it just really made me think about those themes that were brought up in The Eighth Life, of that kind of world history versus personal and social history, you know, where the crossovers are there, and where the overlaps come, and, you know, what counts as one of those or both of those, or when the line becomes so much slightly blurred. And it's written this beautiful spare prose that feels poetic but not self-consciously poetic, if you know what I mean. It's written, I think you can always tell when someone's trying to be overly poetic and quite purple prosy, and this is not that. This is written quite sparingly and gives us just enough detail that we need to conjure this kind of magical, but is it really magical or not, world, you know. So I sped through this really, really quickly. I think it was absolutely gorgeous. And I just love this idea of trace as well, in places and locations and houses, and how they can sort of absorb the spirit, not only of the day, but of the people that reside in them. And I think that's a really evocative thing to not only read about, but also to think about, you know, irrespective of whether you kind of have a belief in the supernatural. I think physical laws would tell us that, you know, energy can't be destroyed. It has to go somewhere. So why wouldn't it creep into the walls of somewhere? Maybe that's indeed what ghosts are, imprints, or the air remembering. And I think that's just really, really beautiful. And again, just some lovely macro storytelling on a global and personal level. Great. So the second one is slightly less obviously linked, but I do think there is crossover, and that is The Betrayals by Bridget Collins, which painted edges, beautiful. So Bridget Collins, the author of The Binding, which I talked about last year, which I really, really loved. This is the follow-up book, The Betrayals, and this is set in Montvert, which is an exclusive academy in the mountains where people apply and are admitted, sort of like a university, I suppose, but they're a bit younger, maybe a boarding school, and they practice this really old kind of art, I want to say, called the Grand Jeu, which is a game that combines like mathematics, music, and not magic, because there's not magic, but it's very sort of, I honestly don't know how to describe it without telling you how to read it. The author does say that in the introduction that it has more than a passing resemblance to the Glass Bead game by Hermann Hesse. But it's basically about there's a contest basically, and you train there at this academy to be able to practice this art form. And I actually don't think it's that important that we completely understand what that is, because that's the kind of means to examine these characters' relationships. It's also quite strangely, there's a character called the Rat, whose identity we don't learn until the very end, and they are someone who skulks in the basements and the passages of this academy. And then, so at first I was a bit like, oh, I'm not really sure what's going on here, but that's the point. And then we meet a character called Leo, who's a government minister, or rather assumed to be disgraced government minister, who's dismissed from his job for questioning the party, so the political party, and then forced to go to Montvert, where he was a student many, many years ago, and had a roommate who was a member of an old family. And something went on there, which we discover through his diary as we sort of flash back to the past and to the present. And there he meets one of the magisters, who's one of the teachers of the game, and sort of like a professor, called Claire, who's the first woman who's ever held that office. And they begin this sort of very uneasy relationship. I don't mean relationship romantically, although there are elements of that, but there's a lot of hostility and animosity between them. And then these sort of political ramifications going on in the background of the party that Leo has left. And then we sort of look back at his past, as I say, where he came from, and also how he came to have, or rather to cultivate, a relationship with his classmate, who we subsequently learn has died and has some connection to the reason that he's now back in this place. I'm really trying not to do spoilers here because I almost gave a really big spoiler and I don't mean to. Another reason I think that this one has resonance is with the Eighth Life is because of those themes of politics as well, and art, and how they intersect and act upon one another. Now, we're never really sure where this takes place. There's no sort of country specifically mentioned, and there are almost elements that might be magical, but they're not really magical because there's no explicit use of magic. Other than this kind of art form, which I suppose you could consider a magic in and of itself. But this political party bears more than a passing resemblance, shall we say, to some of the political undertones that are going on in the Eighth Life with the Soviet Union, and the Red Scares and the Russian Revolution, so on and so forth. And so that's what really made me kind of chime in with that resonance. There's sort of legislation going on underneath with the state wanting to regulate everything, which, high in the UK at the moment with the proposed anti-protest bill. And this idea of sort of state purity of things, or basically controlling culture, which again is massively Soviet, but also not that unresonant to kind of where we live now. And so that's really what made me kind of think, because actually there's no specifics about time passing. This is, if anything, although it does go back in time and forward, it's sort of split into four. So we get like the rat's perspective, we get Claire the teacher's perspective, we get Leo's perspective in the present, and then we also get Leo's diary from the past, and how his relationship with his classmate sort of developed from outright animosity to something else. And that sort of helps us begin to get a better understanding, but without ever being explicit about what this game is and why the game is important, because it's called a game, but it's also an art form, this grand jeu. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. De Courcy, that's the classmate's name. It's from an old family who have practiced the art form for a long time. It did give me sort of Harry Potter vibes in some respects. Not that I wish to publicise that person, but in the sense that there are old families involved in the art form and the game, but there are also newer people who show an aptitude for it, which we see through the character of Claire. She's the first woman to sort of practice this professionally, as it were. And so there's something there, and I think Harry Potter did a similar thing in terms of balancing the world politics with the politics of the magical world that was created. So again, that's where I think the resonance for me came. It's a very well written book. I think I preferred the binding, but then again, it's not a contest, is it? You're allowed to enjoy both. Obviously, enjoy what you like. But this feels more, what would be the word? It feels very second novel-y in the sense that it's more experimental, which I kind of love. This edition is not experimental. That feels like a backhanded compliment. I mean, in terms of willing to push further, like they always say about bands, like the second album is where you start to really play after you find out what worked about the first. There's a lovely deleted scene here with a character of, I think it's Simon. Is it Simon? I want to say, who is a Christian, and Christianity is kind of frowned upon in this world and sort of suppressed. Yes, it's Simon. And again, another thing that made me think about political and religious kind of freedoms and stuff like that, as per USSR. Yes, there's a lead scene here with a narrative that could have happened, which I find is fascinating, and it's kind of I think it's Waterstones exclusive. And there's also like a little bit with the author Bridget Collins where she explains about how much of the reformatting had to take place before it came to publication, and how much she cut and then sort of pasted back in or recreated, which I can understand because it's dealing with a lot. She's juggling with a lot of themes, a lot of plot lines here, and very, very skillfully, if I might add. But that's just like a little quirk at the end, because I quite like to see where a book might have gone versus where it actually ends up being. So hopefully that hasn't confused you too much, because I realise I've gone back and forth on myself a lot there. But the Betrayals is beautifully written. Stick with it for the first chapter if you find, not being quite sure what's going on a bit disconcerting, because it does pay dividends later on when you find out the significance of the character of the rat as the sort of past and present coalesce to hopefully form a more lucid, if you will, future. So there we go. That's the Betrayals. Smells fit. Okay, so that is it for this week. And part 2 of the kind of global political, made up a theme there stuff. So I hope you enjoyed it. Put your library card somewhere safe. We'll try to go digital. I miss those paper tickets though in libraries. Do you remember when you used to go in and give you little tickets in, and they had to like put the slip from the book, like they take a bit of cardboard out and put it in the book and then put it in a little drawer? I miss that. Sometimes technology is not always our friend, I don't think. But anyway, yes. So do sound off in the comments if you like the sound of or absolutely hate the sound of any of the books I've discussed today, and/or anything you're currently reading. Let me know how you feel about the virtual book club. As I say, a proper video for that will come in the next couple of days, depending on my workload. I do try and balance it as well as I can. So fingers crossed that pays off. Just tell me whatever you like. Tell me what tea you like if you want to. Tell me you're eating a blancmange, vegan, obs. I love to hear from you, and I love keeping updated with where you are. Also, and watch out for the questions video if you've got any burning things you'd like to ask me. Force me to admit that I like beige, and all of that. So, as I say, the library is now closed, so put your cards somewhere safe. And until the next time, really look after yourselves, really be safe, particularly with these sort of lockdowns starting to ease a little bit now. Make sensible choices and take care of yourselves. Much love to you. Mwah.